May 28, 1940 Berlin Reich Air Ministry. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring tossed aside an intelligence report with open scorn. It described President Roosevelt's request to Congress expand U.S. aircraft production to 50,000 planes a year. The Americans are desperate if they think such propaganda will scare us, Göring told his staff. They know nothing about war production. Let them try converting their car factories. They'll soon learn that building warplanes takes far more than assembly lines. But Göring was wrong. In Detroit, a Danish immigrant named William Knudsen was already proving it. The former president of General Motors, working for Roosevelt at the symbolic salary of $1 a year, was leading the largest industrial transformation in human history. In less than 4 years, American factories would not only hit the impossible target of 50,000 planes, but nearly double it, turning out almost 100,000 aircraft annually, all while supplying 2 different theaters of war across opposite oceans. The announcement that drew German contempt had come earlier, on May 16, 1940, as German panzers stormed through France. Standing before Congress, Franklin Roosevelt declared, "I should like to see this nation geared up to the ability to turn out at least 50,000 planes a year." Even America's allies were skeptical. In 1939, the U.S. had produced only 3,611 military aircraft. The Army Air Corps owned just 1,700 combat planes, many already outdated. Yet Roosevelt demanded a 14-fold increase. That challenge fell to William Knudsen, the man who would become the architect of this miracle. When asked who could make such production possible, presidential advisor Bernard Baruch replied simply, "First Bill Knudsen, second Bill Knudsen, third Bill Knudsen." Knudsen had walked away from a $300,000 salary to serve his adopted nation. He brought the principles of automotive mass production into aircraft manufacturing, and the transformation began at once. By December 1941, American factories were producing 2,000 military planes every month, a 20-fold increase from just 2 years earlier. Ford announced a massive new bomber plant at Willow Run, Michigan. Boeing expanded its Seattle facilities. Douglas Aircraft hired thousands of workers. The arsenal of democracy was coming to life. The Nazi leadership dismissed America's capabilities, blinded both by prejudice and by choice. General Friedrich von Boeticher, the German military attaché in Washington from 1933 to 1941, had sent back accurate reports about U.S. industrial mobilization. In December 1940, he warned in a cable, "American war production will reach unimaginable heights." Berlin ignored him, calling the warnings defeatist exaggeration. When Boeticher met Hitler in February 1939 to discuss America's potential, the Führer ranted instead about supposed American racial weakness, refusing to listen to the intelligence. He declared that Americans were half Judaized, half negrified, and incapable of sustained warfare. That blindness, rooted in ideology and prejudice, would prove fatal. And it reached every level of Nazi leadership. Luftwaffe intelligence brushed off reports of women entering American aircraft factories, calling it a sign of desperation. They could not imagine that a democracy could outproduce a dictatorship. When reports came in about factories running 3 shifts around the clock, German analysts dismissed them as exaggerations. The Nazi worldview simply could not grasp American reality. Nothing showed this better than Ford's Willow Run plant. Built on farmland starting April 18, 1941, it became the largest factory in the world under a single roof, 3.5 million square feet, with an assembly line stretching a full mile. Charles Sorensen, Ford's production chief, boldly promised to build one B-24 Liberator bomber every hour at a time when other factories were producing only one per day. At first, the results were disastrous. The first bomber, finished in September 1942, had to be completely rebuilt. Quality control problems hit 50%. By February 1943, Willow Run was turning out only 56 bombers a month, far short of the hundreds promised. Critics mocked it with the nickname, "Will it run?" But Ford engineers pushed on, breaking down the B-24's 488,193 parts into smaller sub-assemblies that could finally make mass production possible. They developed hydraulic riveting tools, prefabricated wiring harnesses, and moving assembly lines. Even with 578 design changes in 1943 alone, production never stopped. By September that year, Willow Run was building 148 bombers a month. By December, it was 365. The real breakthrough came in April 1944. Willow Run turned out 428 B-24 bombers that month, one every 63 minutes, running 24 hours a day. That single factory was outproducing the entire German aviation industry. German pilots were the first to realize America's production edge. During the Tunisia campaign, Major Johannes Steinhoff of JG-77 observed in December 1942, "The American pilots are no longer amateurs. Most disturbing, there are more of them every day." Through 1943, that reality became clearer. On January 27, 1943, the U.S. launched its first raid on Germany itself, 64 bombers striking Wilhelmshaven. By October, during Black Thursday at Schweinfurt, the Americans could lose 60 B-17s in a single day and replace them within 2 weeks. The math was impossible to ignore. Then came Big Week, February 20th to 25th, 1944. The 8th and 15th Air Forces flew 3,500 bomber sorties against German aircraft production. The Luftwaffe lost between 262 and 355 fighters, but far worse, about 100 veteran pilots who could not be replaced. General Adolf Galland reported to Göring that Germany was losing 1,200 fighters each month while producing only 1,000. The U.S. by then was producing 2,500 fighters monthly while losing only 400. Major Heinz Bahr, one of Germany's top aces with 220 victories, described a January 1944 mission over Brunswick. The bomber streams stretched from horizon to horizon, at least 700 flying fortresses and liberators. We were 8 fighters against hundreds. It was hopeless. By 1944, American aircraft production had reached staggering levels. In that single year, U.S. factories built 96,270 planes, 16,048 four-engine bombers, 35,743 fighters, and 22,591 multi-engine aircraft. That 1 year of output was greater than Germany's entire wartime total of about 94,677 aircraft. And the gap wasn't just in numbers. Every American bomber carried 13.50 caliber machine guns with thousands of rounds. German fighters were increasingly taking off with only partial ammunition loads. U.S. bombers came equipped with powered turrets, advanced bomb sights, and sophisticated navigation systems. German fighters often lacked even working radios. At Boeing's Seattle Plant 2, production reached 16 B-17s per day by May 1944. Douglas Aircraft, which had only 68 employees in 1936, had expanded to 167,000 workers across 9 facilities. North American Aviation was turning out 500 P-51 Mustangs every month. Lockheed produced 1 P-38 Lightning every 90 minutes, while incorporating 2,127 modifications driven by combat experience. Supporting industries kept pace. General Motors built 57,658 aircraft engines under license. Packard manufactured 55,523 Rolls-Royce Merlins. Alcoa boosted aluminum output by 600%. Dow Chemicals expanded magnesium production from 6 million pounds a year to 333 million. The transformation of America's workforce shattered Nazi assumptions. In 1941, women made up less than 1% of aircraft workers. By 1943, they represented 65%. By 1944, 310,000 women were working in the aircraft industry. At Douglas Long Beach, 22,382 of 41,162 employees were women. Roswell Monroe, the original Rosie the Riveter, drove 3,000 rivets per shift at Willow Run with 99.5% accuracy. Women inspectors at Douglas cut defect rates from 3.2% down to just 0.3%. Ford redesigned tools to fit smaller hands, which unexpectedly improved efficiency. Lighter pneumatic tools reduced fatigue, while better-positioned workstations lowered injuries. German intelligence saw women entering factories as a sign of American desperation. A captured Luftwaffe report dismissed them as temporary workers, predicting a collapse in quality. But the opposite happened. Precision improved. Women excelled at detail work, wiring, instruments, inspections. Their presence showed democratic strength, not weakness. As American production surged, Germany fell deeper into denial. In February 1944, Göring authorized the Jaeger program, scattering production into 729 underground sites that relied on slave labor. At the Middlework complex alone, 60,000 prisoners were forced to work under horrific conditions, with 20,000 dying. These underground factories produced more defects than aircraft. Slave laborers sabotaged parts, and moving materials between scattered sites caused constant delays. Quality control collapsed. The entire Middlework complex was turning out fewer engines each month than Ford's single Chicago plant. Meanwhile, American innovation kept accelerating. Boeing pioneered modular B-29 construction, spreading production across 4 factories with fully interchangeable parts. The pressurized B-29, costing $65,000 each, carried technology Germany couldn't even achieve in prototypes. By early 1945, the U.S. was producing 100 B-29s every month. June 6, 1944 showed the full force of American production. On D-Day, the Allies fielded 11,590 aircraft against just 319 German sorties, a 36-to-1 advantage. This wasn't a matter of tactics. It was industrial annihilation. Between January and May 1944, Allied bombers dropped 145,000 tons on German targets, more than Germany had dropped on Britain during the entire war. Transport aircraft delivered 3 airborne divisions in a single day, using more planes than Germany's transport fleet ever had. By December 1944, single raids sent 1,200 bombers escorted by 900 fighters. The P-51 Mustang gave the Allies everything they needed: range to reach Poland, performance to match any German fighter, and numbers so great that losses no longer mattered. German pilots called them Indians because they seemed to swarm everywhere at once. As defeat closed in, even Nazi leaders admitted the production disaster. In December 1944, Goebbels wrote in his diary, "Göring's promises about Luftwaffe superiority now seem criminal delusions. We fight the world's greatest industrial power with rhetoric." Field Marshal Rommel warned his staff before D-Day. "The Americans can lose 10 tanks for every one we destroy and still overwhelm us. When they land, they will come with such material superiority that no position can hold." Even Hitler himself, by January 1945, confessed this reality to his generals. We should have listened to Boeticher's reports. Their industrial potential was decisive. While we built hundreds, they built tens of thousands. Albert Speer later testified that American bombing cut German production by 35% for tanks, 31% for aircraft, and 42% for trucks. He stated plainly that the American attacks, systematic strikes against industrial targets, caused the collapse of German armaments. Germany's Me-262 jet fighter, which became operational in mid-1944, was a true innovation, flying 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied plane. Hitler and Göring believed this wonder weapon could restore air superiority despite being outnumbered. But Germany produced only 1,430 Me-262s in total, and never had more than 200 operational at the same time. The engines needed overhauls every 10 hours. Critical materials were scarce, forcing the use of weaker substitutes. Meanwhile, America had begun jet development back in 1942. The Bell P-59 proved inferior to German jets, but Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star, faster and more advanced than any German design, entered production before the war's end. American industrial depth meant the U.S. could pursue several technologies at once, a luxury Germany could not afford. That contrast defined the outcome of the production war. Germany's technological edge in jets meant nothing against America's ability to build thousands of conventional fighters while also developing the next generation. In total war, quality without quantity was worthless. Hermann Göring's arrest on May 8, 1945 by soldiers of the U.S. 36th Infantry Division marked the beginning of his final confrontation with reality. At first, Göring was defiant at the interrogation facility in Augsburg. He insisted German technology had been superior, and that defeat came only because of numbers. But when he was moved to Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg, the holding site for high-ranking Nazi prisoners, the questioning grew more intense. In July 1945, Major Kenneth Heckler conducted long interviews that captured Göring's changing views. "I knew American industrial potential was great," Göring admitted. "But the execution exceeded my worst fears. That single factory at Willow Run produced more aircraft than our entire bomber force at peak. It was incomprehensible. He was especially struck by American logistics. Your ability to supply forces across two oceans while maintaining domestic production. This was beyond our conception. We couldn't adequately supply forces 500 miles from Germany. You supplied armies 5,000 miles from America. At Nuremberg, prosecutors confronted Göring with overwhelming evidence of America's industrial superiority. By then, even he could no longer deny it. By 1944, charts showed America producing more aircraft in a single month than Germany managed in an entire year. In court, films of Willow Run's endless assembly lines played as prosecutors listed the German cities leveled by bombers built in that one factory. On March 14, 1946, Göring testified about his struggle to grasp the scale. I believe the economic and technical potential of the United States to be unusually great, particularly the Air Force. But I never imagined they could increase aircraft production 100-fold in 4 years. Such growth seemed physically impossible. Prison psychologist G.M. Gilbert noted Göring's obsession with production numbers. He constantly recalculated ratios, comparing single American plants to all of Germany's output. He fixated on Willow Run in particular, calling it that damned factory that broke our backs. When shown the figures, 812,615 American aircraft engines built versus Germany's 241,675, Göring stared at the numbers in silence. The math of defeat could not be denied. The scope of America's transformation remains staggering even today. From only 3,611 military aircraft in 1940, the United States built 295,959 by the war's end, 97,810 bombers, 99,465 fighters, and 98,684 other aircraft. This was not just about quantity, it showed systemic superiority in every part of production. At its peak, 2 million Americans worked in aircraft manufacturing, representing an unprecedented mix of people. Women, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, disabled workers, teenagers, and the elderly. This democratic mobilization achieved what totalitarian command never could. Voluntary cooperation outperformed forced labor by every measure. The men and women who stepped into factories in 1941 knowing nothing about airplanes emerged in 1945 as the most skilled aviation workforce in the world. They didn't just build planes, they reinvented manufacturing itself. Statistical quality control, first developed for bomber production, became a standard for industry everywhere. Automation principles pioneered at Willow Run transformed global manufacturing. The engineers who built bomber assembly lines went on to design the Saturn V rocket. The women who riveted B-24s raised children who would walk on the moon. The production miracle didn't end with victory. It launched the American century. Its financial scale was just as staggering. Aircraft production consumed $45 billion in 1940s dollars, equal to about $800 billion today. The B-29 program alone cost more than the Manhattan Project. Instead of bankrupting America, war production created an era of prosperity never seen before. The unemployment that haunted the Depression years disappeared entirely. Between 1940 and 1945, personal income doubled. Workers themselves helped finance the effort. At Willow Run alone, employees bought $45 million worth of war bonds, funding the very factory where they worked. Germany faced the opposite. By 1944, it devoted 40% of its industry to aircraft production, yet still built less than half of what America produced. Reliance on slave labor backfired badly. Sabotage was common, quality collapsed, and worker productivity actually declined after 1943. In contrast, American productivity soared, up 300%. The industrial base built for war became the engine of post-war prosperity. Aluminum smelters that once made bombers now supplied suburban housing. Chemical plants that refined aviation fuel turned to making plastics for consumer goods. Machine tool factories that armed aircraft plants went on to equip American industry for global leadership. And it wasn't just production, it was organization. The War Production Board coordinated 184,000 companies smoothly, while IBM punch card machines tracked millions of parts flowing through thousands of suppliers. MIT's Radiation Laboratory, with 4,000 scientists, created navigation systems that let American bombers fly in any weather. When combat showed the B-17 was vulnerable to frontal attacks, Boeing added Chin turrets in just 60 days. In the Pacific, when longer range was needed, the B-24 was quickly modified, without slowing production. In Germany, similar changes took months or even years. This speed was as important as sheer numbers. American aircraft constantly evolved, shaped by real combat experience around the world. Information from battles in the Pacific could reach factories in the Atlantic within days. Meanwhile, German aircraft, built in isolated underground factories by slave labor, stayed largely unchanged while American designs improved week by week. The feedback loop between combat and production created unmatched efficiency. Pilots' reports reached engineers right away. Engineers' fixes were on assembly lines within days. Even workers on the line could send suggestions straight to designers. This open, democratic flow of ideas proved far more effective than Germany's rigid, top-down system. On October 15, 1946, just hours before his scheduled execution, Hermann Göring wrote his final letter. In it, he made his clearest admission about the true cause of defeat. The Americans won through industrial power, not military skill. We were not beaten by better soldiers, but by better factories. The nation we mocked as only capable of making consumer goods buried the Wehrmacht under aluminum and steel. His last words to psychologist Gustav Gilbert were just as telling. We declared war on an industrial giant while it slept. When it awoke, we were doomed. They didn't just outproduce us, they reinvented production itself. Every part of their system was stronger than ours. That night, Göring took his own life. Yet his final testimony remains history's verdict on the production war. The Reich's top marshal, who once dismissed America's strength, died knowing a single U.S. factory had outbuilt his entire air force over the course of the war. Military historians agree that America's production power was the deciding factor in Allied victory. Without the overwhelming supply of weapons, vehicles, and aircraft, D-Day could not have happened, the bombing campaign could not have lasted, and the Pacific War could not have been won. Air war historian Richard Overy put it bluntly. The outcome was determined not by fighting spirit or tactical brilliance, but by the weight of material. The Allies won because they buried their enemies under an avalanche of production. The numbers prove it. By 1944, America alone was building more military aircraft than every other country on Earth combined, both Axis and Allied. This wasn't just a small edge. It was dominance on a massive scale. Germany wasn't merely defeated, it was crushed. But the meaning of this production miracle went far beyond the battlefield. It showed that democracy was stronger than dictatorship, that freedom was more powerful than tyranny, and that voluntary cooperation could achieve more than forced labor. The workers who made this possible weren't slaves or conscripts, but free citizens united by a common purpose. Hermann Göring's dismissal of America's production power became one of history's greatest mistakes. His contempt for what democracy could achieve in industry cost Germany the war, and millions of lives. By ignoring America's true capabilities, he sealed the fate of the Third Reich before the first bomber even appeared over German skies. The leap from producing 3,000 planes a year to more than 100,000 proved that free societies, when pushed to the brink, could accomplish the impossible. American workers didn't just meet President Roosevelt's bold challenge, they doubled it. They didn't just keep pace with Germany's output, they outproduced it 5 times over, all while fighting a two-ocean war. Modern leaders should take note of Göring's mistake. To dismiss democratic nations as weak because they choose peace, or to underestimate free people's ability to produce because they value prosperity over conquest, is to invite disaster. In 1940, America looked unready for war. By 1944, it had become an unstoppable industrial giant. The arsenal of democracy proved that production lines could be just as decisive as front lines, and that workers on assembly lines could play as great a role in victory as soldiers in battle. Factories proved to be as crucial as soldiers. Industrial mobilization determined victory, just as much as military strategy. Göring learned this lesson too late, and it came at the cost of his nation's destruction. From the moment he scoffed at Roosevelt's 1940 announcement to his execution at Nuremberg in 1946, Göring's path mirrored the downfall of Nazi Germany. His contempt for American production became the epitaph of the Third Reich, a regime that confused ideology with real capability, mistook tyranny for strength, and believed racial myths could somehow overcome industrial mathematics. The Reichsmarshal who once mocked America's ability to build airplanes died, knowing a single year of U.S. factories. 1944, outproduced all of Germany's war efforts combined. His laughter at democratic industry became history's most costly joke, paid for with the price of total defeat. America produced 295,959 military aircraft. Germany produced 94,677. But the true victory wasn't just in the numbers. It was in the method, proving that free workers could outproduce slaves, that democratic cooperation could achieve more than totalitarian command, and that a nation of immigrants and diverse citizens could unite to do the impossible. The B-24 bombers rolling off American assembly lines weren't just machines of war. They were symbols of what free people, working together, could accomplish. The planes rolling off Willow Run's assembly line every 63 minutes were more than aircraft. They were democracy's answer to tyranny. Every rivet was set by a woman who had been a housewife only months earlier. Every engine was built by a teenager who had left high school to serve. Every wing was assembled by workers who had once fled poverty and discrimination. Together, they proved that free people, when united for a just cause, could bury tyranny under an avalanche of production. Hermann Göring once laughed at the idea of America producing 50,000 planes a year. America responded by producing twice that number, reshaping global history in the process. His laughter became the sound of catastrophic miscalculation, the fatal mistake of dismissing democracy's arsenal by a man who understood neither democracy nor production. In the end, both democracy and industry buried him, along with everything he represented, under 300,000 aircraft that turned his contempt into history's most absolute defeat.